Just stop my share to make sure. Okay, we are recording. All right. Great to see everybody today. I'm jealous that you're so close to that lovely Blue Ridge Mountain scene there behind Tom. Where did you guys go? And I just want to introduce my colleague who's here, Erin Barker. She runs our success program and is helping me manage these pilots. So she's somebody that will be a pedagogical and technical resource for you guys moving forward. Want to say hello, Erin?
I did while we were waiting for you, but hi again.
Oh, well, now I see your background, and well, they're just different types of mountain ranges, I guess, right? I like the low, Blue Ridge, but Erin's in Colorado, so I imagine that's the Rockies.
Yes, that is just outside Aspen.
Cool. I'm jealous. I'm in Central Texas, so we have something called the Hill Country here, and it's pales in comparison to the geology you guys have. All right, let's go ahead and jump in here. This deck has some resources in it that might be useful to you moving forward. So I created a bit.ly link, app hype, that you can go ahead and grab the deck. I'll share the resources with Tom as well. And so, these are things about how to use it in Moodle and how to introduce annotation to students and things like that that might be useful moving forward. Even links to schedule Erin for one-to-one meetings are somewhere in this deck as well. All right, so annotation. Annotation is nothing new, as I'm sure you as scholars and know. As I said, I'm an English professor by training. When I taught English, when I taught comp, I also taught high school English for about 8 years. I used to always hand out this poem on the first day of class, Billy Collins's Marginalia. We have all seized the white perimeter as our own and reached for a pen, if only to show we did not just laze in an armchair turning pages. We pressed a thought into the wayside, planted an impression along the verge. I would hand this out with my syllabus because I thought that annotation was that important to my students' success in basically all other aspects of the course. How class discussion went, how obviously reading quizzes, if I was doing that in the high school level. But ultimately they're, papers. Back then we used to write papers. I don't know if people still do that in higher ed, but they used to produce a paper and that was the product. And it was based obviously on reading. But that reading piece was sort of invisible to me as an instructor. I'd hand this poem out and then grade them on the paper 5 weeks later. But it wasn't a radical thing to do. Annotation is a tried and true sort of academic and scholastic practice and has been around since probably longer than the book itself. But when we start to deliver text online, we lose the margin in a lot of ways. We don't have that ability to practice that fundamental skill to literacy of annotation because we're reading PDFs that don't necessarily come in a platform that or delivery mechanism that allows us to take those kinds of notes. And so part of what Hypothesis does is kind of revive the margin for students and instructors to create a space where they can take those notes that have been traditionally helpful as they move through a course or through a text. But there's obviously some added affordances that we can bring to the annotation practice when it moves online into a networked environment. So with Hypothesis, any website, article, ebook, document, multimedia can have multiple layers of annotation. That traditional private layer of notes can be there. There can also be a public layer. That's disabled in the LMS integration, but Hypothesis isn't just an LMS tool or an ed tech company. We have a browser extension that people use across the web in all kinds of fields and for personal use. The Washington Post recently adopted Hypothesis for their journalists to annotate primary source documents from the news section. If you Google Obama's endorsement of Biden, you'll see that has Washington Post journalists annotating the statement at the post.com. And then any number of private groups, and this is really the most important thing for education. Private groups of your colleagues, if you're teaching a text together, private groups for your colleagues as part of professional development or your research across other people in your specialization, but most importantly, private groups for your course. So a private layer of annotation that's shared among all students and instructors in a course. I did just want to add a note. Please feel free to use the chat for questions. I'll come back to that if you have them. and also Aaron might be able to chime in. I will say Aaron's about 2 weeks into this gig, so don't ask too difficult questions of her, or don't expect her to be able to answer every question, although she's catching on quick. Three sort of top level takeaways that I've gotten from instructors and students that use hypothesis for collaboration annotation in the classroom. The first one's not a particularly new one. It's that same idea that Billy Collins mentions, being an active learner, being an active reader, far from a radical idea today. But it is harder to be active with online texts, right? And the research suggests that students are not retaining as much, they're not as engaged as much, they're skimming through online texts. And so this is a way to slow them down and bring back that active reading practice of annotation. I will say that it also allows one to be active in their reading in new ways. So this professor actually was teaching this poem, and he had all his literature, American literature course, up online as part of a course when they were annotating them regularly. I think he got tired of the normal sort of close reading, textual analysis, text-based annotation, and decided with this poem he was just going to have all the students annotate just with an image. So it was a really neat exercise where students had to grab a piece of text and then come up with an image. And you can see here somebody chose Dwight Schrute from The Office to connect to a piece of the poem. But there were images from classical art, memes that students created, more contemporary images. It was a neat exercise in visual rhetoric, I think, and how to make arguments or think about the way that images communicate. So there's a tremendous amount of creativity in how we can be active with annotations online. And you'll see you can add images and links in your annotations a little bit later when I demo it. This one really is the heart of it for me, the idea that hypothesis can make reading visible. I really do think reading is a kind of an invisible process in education. We haven't been able to be there with our students when they're engaged in that process. And that's a critical time for them to be understanding the text, beginning to critically analyze the text. And this allows us to be present at that moment when they're encountering it. It allows their classmates to help each other through the text. But it really makes the practice visible. First and foremost, or not for, I would say first, but not foremost, this can be used sort of for reading compliance, in the sense like, did they do their reading? And annotations prove that, they opened it and put a couple comments in there, and that's better than, as my Spanish professor in high school and college used to do, sort of stare into the eyes of the students in the class to see if they'd done the reading. She always got me, but when I was a teacher, I didn't have that sort of magical ability to see whether they'd done the reading. This is an indication that they have. But more importantly, I think it's an indication for you as an instructor to see how they've done the reading. Where were they confused? Where did a lot of questions come up? Is that something to start class with? Where were the deepest threads? Where is the most excitement? You can see if a particular student was grasped by a particular idea, and then encourage that student's line of inquiry based on their annotations. So this idea of making reading visible, I think, is incredibly powerful. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that can happen inside of Moodle with hypothesis, because we connect to the gradebook. So you can make it visible, and you can also, and addressable, and you can also make it gradable if you choose. And then finally, again, I've already sort of mentioned this, but hypothesis makes reading social. And I just want to add that, first of all, it's a great quote. Hypothesis is my literary Facebook. I've been holding on to that one for about 4 years, since this student wrote a blog about her experience using hypothesis at Plymouth State. But every year, every time we do the surveys of students in classrooms using hypothesis, the number one thing they say about their experiences that they learn from their peers. I think this is obviously a really awesome thing to see students collaborating on knowledge creation. Lately, I've been looking at a lot of data in our courses around questions asked and answers given. And there's some really powerful data that we see, at least from a kind of data standpoint of, there were 34 questions asked as part of this course in annotations, and 72 answers given. So to me, that indicates that whether it's instructor or other students are asking questions and somebody's responding, somebody's helping them through that difficult piece where they were confused or had some kind of question, which I think is really cool. So that peer-to-peer learning piece is another important part. I'll demo this, so I'm going to move even more quickly. I know I talk quickly through this portion of the presentation, but when hypothesis is active, you can select text and annotate it. You can reply to an existing annotation. One way to think about collaborative annotation for those completely new to it is a kind of an alternative or supplement to discussion forums. Obviously, as an English teacher, the text is the heart of it, so I want students to be grounded in the text and everything that they do. I don't think that's really restricted to the humanities. I know it's obviously important in history as well. I saw we had a historian I've talked to health professionals or, health education professionals, professional health education educators. I don't know what the, professors that are training clinicians and physicians and things like that. And it's obviously textual evidence being grounded in the text, picking apart difficult text is also a part of those fields. So it's not something that's unique to the humanities, but the reply piece, I think, is an important one to note, just that it's a function, and it may be something you want to leverage in the activities and exercises and assignments that you give to students. Not every annotation assignment, you'll see it's a very flexible tool. You can do all kinds of annotation assignments, but if you're going for the discursive, the reply piece obviously is key, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. So some initial resources about annotation generally, and now I'm going to jump into the Moodle of it all, but I'm going to pause and take a sip of coffee and see if there are any questions at this point. And feel free to unmute and chat. Lowercase chat, I guess.
Damiana had a question in the chat window.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm very excited to see you because I've been watching YouTube videos, so it's really cool to actually see someone in person in real life,
Great.
Zoom life. So that's cool. But I'm teaching a class. I'm going to pilot this. I'm excited to try it out for my summer session, which starts in a week.
Mm-hmm.
And I want them to annotate their readings for the class, but I have 2 sections of it. So I'm wondering how to do that. And later when we get the logistical stuff, I'm just interested in how to do that. And if I can still use the same Google Drive file or whatever with later courses. So it's a kind of logistical question. So I'm happy to wait until we get to that.
Yeah, I'm just gonna, let's wait on that, and I'll definitely address that. Let me address that in the context of sort of demoing inside of Moodle, but please remind me if I don't get to the fullness of it. There's sort of a 2-part answer there. There's a yes, no problem, and then like a well, sort of, and soon part of it too. But certainly teaching the same PDF course by course is not going to show the same annotations. Your students in your fall course would never be able to see your students in your summer course. Splitting into smaller groups within the summer course is a little more complicated, but I'll get to that. All right, so there's some resources for Moodle here in the presentation as well. And I'm going to go ahead and jump into Moodle. This is my demo course, should look pretty familiar to you guys in terms of just the Moodle piece. I work in a Poetry 101 sort of demo course because I'm an English professor by training. So you can see these are the various states and provinces and places that I've presented previously. But I did create a North Carolina module. So when I open up basically Hypothesis allows you to make annotatable readings inside of Moodle. So all of these readings are links to annotatable documents, right? Mostly poetry and academic essays and things like that. So when I clicked on the Sandberg poem, it opens up in a new window, a new tab rather, and you'll see a couple things here. This is Hypothesis right here. This is a little sidebar. So Hypothesis is active on it. And when I select text, I'm given the option of highlighting, default private act, or annotating. And highlight would be private to the student, not visible to the instructor. And then I can also create an annotation, and my options there are also private or to the group. And so again, if I taught this poem in another course, I would see a different layer. I mean, this probably should say Poetry 101 Spring 2020, right? And then for Poetry 101 Spring Summer 2020, totally different group, totally different access, totally different layer on top of the poem for all involved in that course. So I'm going to share it to that, and you can see this is the basic annotation window. I know we have a diverse set of disciplines represented. There's no prescription on how this annotation window gets used, this annotation bubble gets used. I'm an English professor by training, so I want, close reading is what I would want in a high level English class, but across disciplines, across skill levels, even across the timeline of a course, you might have different types of annotation exercises. So for example, one thing that I've been talking to a lot with folks is, first day of class, when you're meeting face to face, you usually hand out the syllabus and talk about it, right? At least that's what they did when I taught over 10 years ago. Can't do that when you're not face to face. Have them annotate it, right? That's not going to be a close reading assignment. It's going to leverage the hypothesis functionality. It might not be a graded assignment, but it's a perfectly reasonable way for students to ask questions or talk about where they're most excited in the course, and of course, get a little bit of a handle on the tool itself for later use. So this can be used in a lot of different ways. You can format the text within it. You can add an image through Markdown. You can also use LaTeX. I think I saw some more mathy type disciplines possibly represented, but you can write in LaTeX. You can use tags. I'd say this is a sort of level 201 annotation activity in terms of how you might leverage tags to help students think about how they're annotating. Since I know there's somebody from composition here, one way to do this would be in a kind of rhetorical analysis exercise. We did Aristotelian kind of style rhetorical analysis at UT, but we would have, you know, students look for ethos, pathos, and logos in an article. And so that would be a way to say, I want you to find an example of each in this reading and tag your annotation with the Aristotelian mode that is appropriate. And that would allow us then to look at that article and just, we can search up here for a particular tag. So we could look at it through the ethos lens, or through the pathos lens, or through the logos lens. Again, that could be totally different for your discipline, right? Might be different in reading a biology journal article or something like that. It could be more sophisticated in the sense of like high level, you know, criticism, like a Marxist mode or feminist mode of historical interpretation or something like that. So this can be used in all kinds of ways. You know, you just type something and post, and there it is. I can collapse it. I can hide the annotations. I can create a page note, which is not attached to a specific piece of text within the document. It's a good place, I think, for to add a little prompt for students. Think about X, Y, and Z as you're reading here. Or also for a student, if there's some kind of top level comment they want to make about it, this is an appropriate place to do that. As I said, you can search the sidebar. You can also reorder the sidebar by recency rather than location. And then one other thing to show here is that this was a gradable Moodle activity. So as the instructor, and it's not going to be super dramatic right now, but as the instructor, I have this top pane up here, which students would not see. And what I'm able to do here, and I think this is really cool and part of this sort of making reading visible thing, is that this is a pretty long poem. So if I had 20 students, each creating 3 annotations, it could get pretty busy and noisy and complicated to navigate. I still think you can do that and engage, you know, in conversation and the various points in the text that where stuff comes up. But the grading view allows me to cycle student by student, to go student by student and see, this is Erin's contributions to the text. Her required 3 annotations. Did she do them? Did she properly tag ethos, pathos, and logos? I can send the grade to the grade book up there. Yes, that's a way for you to isolate, focus in on a particular user, and evaluate their annotations. I'm going to stop there and look at the chat for a second.
There are a fair amount of questions in the chat about groups and adding a document for specific groups within a class.
Okay. Good questions. Let me show you how to create one of these activities and see if I cover some of it, and then please chime in as necessary. So I'm going to add an activity to my North Carolina poetry class.
No.
And I go to type external tool, and Tom can verify that this is the workflow you guys have. Type external tool and add it. And then wait. Session. Is this the problem you ran into, Tom?
Yeah, it was similar. Something about hypothesis could not connect.
The workflow should be, and we have this documented, so if something's down right now, we can share the documentation, but basically I add an activity or resource. And if this happens again, Aaron, could you ping Michael that there might be something going on with Moodle? Add external tool. Okay, no worries. So what was I going to add? A.R. Eamon's poem. You won't have 3 hypotheses, but is this generally where it is, Tom, that there's a drop down, an external tool available to folks in their workflow here? Does that look right? Okay.
That's exactly right.
So you won't have 3. I have 3 because I work at hypothesis, right? So I have 1 hypothesis. So I got the name, I pre-configure the tool. I don't think I have to do anything with privacy. Trying to remember where I tell it I want it to grade it or not. Oh, accept grades from tool. So if I want this to be a gradable assignment, it's defaulted to accept grades. I think if I click this, it won't be a gradable assignment. So I'll save and display. And then this is the key stage to sort of conceptualize as you're preparing to, this is my second demo of the day and second LMS. So it's always a little different for me. But this is the key stage at which you configure a assignment or activity for hypothesis. You have to select a document. And you either are selecting a public URL or a PDF in an associated Google Drive account. And
That's
so
where
for,
sorry, that's where it breaks down on our instance right now.
with the
So
Google Drive?
Either one of those, if you click on it, it's and it was working. So
Okay.
anyway, sorry, we'll get to that.
Yeah, so we need to choose A.R. Abrams' poem. I don't know if any of the English people there have a suggestion, but it's not all that important. We'll just choose this one. And I'm just going to grab the URL, bring it back to Moodle, and submit. Hopefully it works. And so here it is in Moodle, the poem, and then there's hypothesis. And we can begin annotating. The other workflow, as I mentioned, is through Google Drive. So you'd have to associate a Google Drive account and grab your PDF from there. So let's see. That was a non-gradable activity, just so we know. You can go back and see that top bar is not there. So that was, we turned off the grading. So I'll work up from the bottom here. Non-public URLs like resources behind a library wall. We are in late stage conversations with folks like EBSCO and ProQuest, but right now what you see is what you get in those non-public URLs, those permalinks to library resources will break down because they require authentication. And although the user can authenticate as an App State student, hypothesis doesn't have that privilege. But eventually in that stage where I showed you the choice between Google Drive or a public URL, we'll have things like, select a text from EBSCO or select a text from ProQuest or VitalSource or something like that. So right now the workflow is downloading those resources and then uploading them again, like a PDF from a Google Drive. So I'll go ahead and do the Google Drive workflow so you can see what that looks like. We are going to add an integration with Moodle's files at some point, but that requires some work with the API that's a little more complex. So this is a Google PDF example. Again, I choose hypothesis, save and display. I don't know why it doesn't just show me what I want, but again, we're back at this stage. Select PDF from Google Drive. Do you guys see my authentication window here? Where it's sort of, the Google of it is sort of saying associated Google Drive account?
Yep.
Okay. So then I just choose a Google Drive account and I'm given a basic interface for selecting or loading a document. So you actually don't have to prepare a folder in Google Drive. You can just upload right here from something on your desktop. But I do have some, this is actually unfortunately a, what state was that presented to? A New York State PDF. And we'll use this one. Select the PDF. And otherwise the workflow is quite the same. Here it opens up. It's a PDF, and hypothesis is over here. So hopefully that was helpful for the Google Drive workflow, Lynn. I answered about non-public URLs, download and then upload through the Google Drive interface. What do you recommend the link target on the LTI tool? Embed new page. Yeah, if I understand correctly, Gregory, the loading in the new page, I could load this in the same window for my students and still have the Moodle navigation, which probably wouldn't be that much of a problem on this text. Hey, buddy. Your professors are getting younger and younger. You know, a young gentleman on the video there that looked about 10 years old. But if there were two PDF pages side by side here, the real estate would get thin. So I recommend opening in a new tab these resources so that there's more real estate for the document and the annotation pane. And you know, you can get back to Moodle in a different way. So I don't know if that made sense, but loading in a new tab creates more real estate for the document and the annotation sidebar. PDF files in the accompanying annotation system is not user-friendly, especially for accessibility. At least what I'm. Actually, it has been designed with those issues in mind, Amy. We're WCAG AA compliant. We've had an external reviewer test the tool for accessibility and compliance with WCAG AA compliance, as well as other sort of universal design elements. And so my understanding, I haven't used it with a screen reader, is that there's a pretty, you know, equitable experience for folks using screen readers and other assistive technologies within the LMS context. The PDF files do need to be OCR'd in that context, right? A PDF that's just an image is not accessible, but that's a PDF image. Do you want to say hi? Sorry, well, that's my friend. Did that make sense, Amy? And I'm scrolling up and missing the stuff down. But yeah, so the PDF being OCR'd is an important piece. You know, this is a modern PDF, so it came with this image on this text on top of it. But everybody on this call looks quite, you know, young and nimble and probably doesn't have one of these. But if you Xerox something 30 years ago and now have converted it into a PDF, again, not saying that would be anybody in this particular call, but that would not be accessible and it wouldn't have that optical characters on top of that. So you probably had this experience as a user. You have tried to select text in a PDF, highlight it, and it just bounces off because it's just an image. Whereas some PDFs, you can actually copy and paste the text by selecting it. The latter is the kind that works best with hypothesis, and that also happens to be, you know, more accessible because a screen reader can read those optical characters. We can do that OCR work for you. We know that can be a pain. So we do provide that as a service. If you have an old 30-year-old Xerox that's now a PDF, you can send it to us and we'll add the optical characters on top of it. But there's some, you know, free online tools to do that, as well as Adobe Acrobat Pro. I have not kept up with the questions because there are just so many. You're a wonderful group. I don't know about Greg's picture, but if anybody wants to voice a question that I've missed, or Aaron or Tom wants to surface something.
Can students upload PDFs that are then annotated by peers in the class?
That is a great question. And normally the answer is no, but because you are a Moodle school, the answer is yes. Because of the way Moodle was designed with sort of, you know, interactive educational philosophy principles, there is a way to, wrong workshop, there is a way for students to add text themselves. And you'll see I have a gesture towards that in my demo interface, where I've been, you know, telling students to read these poems, and then towards the end, I'm like, okay, everybody select a poem they want us to analyze and upload it. So there is a way to create a Moodle activity that you then turn over the ownership of that activity to a specific student. So there is a little bit of burden. I don't know who asked the question, but there's a little burden on the instructor to set it up in a certain way, but you can set up a number of activities. You know, I had to generate these activities and make them hypothesis activities and then leave them unconfigured. And then a student can come in and do the configuration, meaning they can come in and add the text. And so I see a couple use cases for that. One, tired of reading the professor's assigned readings and wanting students to be able to choose a reading to share with the class. That's a way to do it, so that it can be student-driven inquiry or student-driven selection of text. And then the other one is for peer review of writing, right? Every student adds their paper to a place. Sorry, my dog is getting a little rambunctious down here. So yeah, I think that's a really cool thing, and it's a Moodle admin at another college pointed that out to me, and I was really excited because I will say, if you know hypothesis in the wild outside the LMS, that is one of the powerful pieces of pedagogy that, or pedagogical practices that is not possible in LMS, largely because most LMSs are, I think, designed to be top-down, teacher-driven. Yeah, she's a husky. Top-down, teacher-driven, right? Like teacher chooses reading, students do a thing, even or whatever. So Moodle's designed because it sort of allows that more fluidity of roles is really cool, and allows a student to select something. And I have documentation around the workflow there if it sounds confusing. I think I even linked to it later in the presentation. I'm going to pause again for, yeah, the student guide can be helpful. Right now it's just PDFs and these public web pages, but we have an EPUB integration that we're working on and bringing to the LMS, and working with partners like VitalSource and others to work on top of other documents. But right now it's these PDFs or public URLs for the time being. So I'm going to just throw out like 5 different ways to think, or actually 6 with the Moodle of it all, about how to think about using hypothesis. I think I did see something about PowerPoints maybe. So this may address that. Just to get back to that question about groups though, really quickly. Right now, there is a one-to-one relationship between the course and the hypothesis layer. Meaning that on this poem, I don't have a technical way right now to subdivide a larger course into smaller reading groups. So I think it was you, Damiana, that asked this question. I can't remember who it was, but so in terms of that second question, yeah, students in my fall course won't see this work from the summer. But in terms of within a course, creating smaller groups, that is exactly what we're working on. Our developers are working on right now, but we don't have that right now. It's a one-to-one relationship between group and course. So a 100-person physics course annotating, a chapter of a textbook could work, but a 100-person English course all annotating a single 14-line poem, it's going to get too noisy. We're, again, developing a technical solution for breaking into smaller groups within a course, so that you can have smaller reading groups. Right now, our workarounds are largely cultural, whether it's, me saying students A through G read sonnets 1 through 5, and H through M or whatever read sonnets 6 through 10, or there is a way to create multiple versions of a text and assign it to the groups within Moodle. But those are workarounds that I think you probably want to, don't do it at home, folks, without our help or something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah.
And if you can grade it student by student, it's less of consideration, and I only have total 25 students or something, so it's probably not going to be a hot mess.
Right.
It's not going to be quite as bad. This question is for Tom and Greg, which is related. If I'm doing a meta course and I have my students grouped in that meta course, will that link them to this document? That's something you can just ponder and let me know. But I don't know if, because I've set it up as a meta course and they are technically in 2 groups, but it's in the same course.
This is Greg. From what I've heard so far, enrollments are enrollments. So you have 2 sections of 30 people and you've meta course them in. So you have 60 participants. That's going to be 60 people annotating. It's from what I've heard so far. Maybe
Okay,
Jeremy.
Yeah, I don't know about the Moodle of it all. I'd love to test that and see how it breaks down. You know, unfortunately, I will say I've been pretty disappointed in LTI as a standard in terms of how a third-party tool can work with the ways that the LMS divvies up students. You know, Canvas has sections and groups. They're different things. We are about to release a sections integration for Canvas, which sounds a lot like what you're talking about, where it's like, I'm teaching a course, it's sort of one course, but I have it sectioned out in the, you know, infrastructure of Canvas. And we are about to release an integration with that specific concept, which sounds very similar to the mega course or whatever you're talking about. But unfortunately, LTI doesn't provide us the ability to do that. We have to go APIs. We have to use APIs. This is, you know, gobbledygook for some of you, but we have to use the APIs within the LMS to do that. So that means we have to go LMS by LMS to deliver that subgrouping functionality. But it is the priority because we totally get the need for the larger classes, especially. But even, you know, I do think with creativity, that 25-person class, you will be able to get, you know, have a tremendous amount of, you know, I don't think you'll have a lot of hot mess, as you said, but there's still a use case, even in that 25-person class, even if you could all annotate a poem for other pedagogical reasons, not just real estate, say, I want to have different people annotate this in different ways, or, you know, in different groups for some other pedagogical reason besides the, you know, the main reason is real estate, right? So 100 people on a 14-line poem would be crazy. 100 people on a 30-page academic article, maybe not. 100 people on a third of a novel, maybe not. But certainly this is something to navigate about in terms of thinking about course size and text, document size, and how messy will it get. I will say, look at the student guide. The student guide I have put together thinking about cultural ways that one's annotation practice could make things less messy, right? So I don't know if you've had this experience going to a college bookstore, but, you know, I used to always pick up a textbook and then sometimes somebody highlighted the entire first chapter and I'm like, this is unhelpful, right? So there's a similar considerations here, right? Don't highlight the entire paragraph. We're just gonna talk about 3 words. Think carefully about text selection. That's gonna reduce noise. Think carefully about whether you should overlap another person's annotations, or if there's already an existing annotation, reply so that you have a threaded discussion. These are practices that make, you know, the annotation experience a little cleaner. Okay, let me run through the rest of the presentation, then we can open up for questions. So 5 ways to think about annotation. The first one I take from a history professor I worked at UT Austin, where I'm based in Austin, who's just teaching Machiavelli class. And so obviously close reading of a kind of older text was an important part of, unpacking old text was an important part of her work. But she said her main takeaway was the community of it all, the way the students bonded through the tool and learned to work together through the tool, that then transferred to other activities in the course, made them a tighter group when they met face to face, but also gave them collaboration tools and skills and comfort levels that transfer to, you know, non-annotation based or text-based activities. And obviously in this post-COVID moment, I don't know apps states, you know, where you guys are at with online, but I think keeping the class, maintaining community in classes is a big challenge, I think, as we move our content online. Sorry, the dog's trying to escape. Huskies are a wily breed. This is a 4-month-old puppy, and she's a handful. So community is one way to think about this, regardless of sort of the textual stuff. You can just turn this on, right? That's one use case here, is to just turn it on and see what students do if you don't have time to think about a particular exercise. But I do think the more directed, the better. But you can just turn it on and have students be creative in the use of that space. Hey, Ronya, shh. Another way to think about this is using it for guided reading. You being the one that guides your students, like Virgil through of Dante through the Inferno, the trilogy there. you may have times when you want to help gloss things for students. This is, we see at younger levels, you know, I see middle school teachers using this a lot to kind of pre-populated text with annotations for students to help them get through it. At the college level, you know, again, there's other use cases here. You can model annotation as you want your students to practice, but there also may be prompts you want to put in for students to respond in threaded discussion to. So there's a use case for you being the guide, the annotation guide. Of course, I think the heart of it is this seminar style discussion online of reading together. You know, my fantasy of teaching college English when I went to grad school, which was devastatingly shattered. No, I'm just kidding. Was that we'd all be out on the lawn with our books in our hands and talking about the ideas and the language. And that is part of what we do as college educators, right? Have a book out, be attending to the text. And this is a really powerful way to do that online when we can't be face-to-face, or to do so asynchronously when we can sync up face-to-face. Teachers often say to us that, you know, their class discussions are so much better after a hypothesis assignment, or they're able to accelerate their class discussions ahead of where they might normally start. They're 10, 20 minutes into the normal class discussion because we've sort of dispensed of like some of the sort of easier parts of like, did you read, did you get it? And you can jump right in to say, like, just picking on a name I see in front of me, like, Catherine, your point on page 3 that had a lot of responses. Can you sort of talk about what you were thinking on that passage? And you have a great anchor to start your class discussion. I think especially when you're, you know, in the Zoom world for your synchronous portion. Obviously, Zoom can be a little awkward. It's not super, I don't know, it's not the same as being face-to-face. And so having an artifact with you is a power to point to, helps that conversation get started more organically and authentically. If you do teach a larger class, I think I saw something above about PowerPoints. You can turn a PowerPoint into a PDF and have students annotate your lecture notes. You can turn a slide deck into a PowerPoint, have students annotate your lecture. So that's another option for creating sort of annotatable artifacts for students to engage, especially as, you know, some of the stuff we do, you know, face-to-face is now happening online. And then, as I said, Moodle only, this idea of independent shared inquiry. And this is just how, you know, an image, and there's a link here, how to sort of empower students with the ability to configure a hypothesis activity so that they're the one bringing the text to the class. And this is a step-by-step guide down here on how to do that in Moodle. One other thing I just want to mention, I need to create a graphic for this. I mentioned it before, is annotating the syllabus and annotating other ancillary documents of a course. I was speaking to a professor at Cornell the other day, and she had, you know, was teaching students introductions, how to write an introduction, and she had a handout for it. So, you know, instead of literally handing it out, she sent it out as a hypothesis activity, and was able to, you know, had students engage with that handout, talking just about how they might normally in a class when she did a handout, using hypothesis. And I do think that's a great way to start the use of the tool, as a low stakes, like annotate the syllabus. It's kind of a neat way to bring students into the fold of what you're teaching and how you're thinking about the semester, and maybe even get their feedback or where their trepidation or excitement is. But also they kind of sneakily get used to the tool. So when it comes down to annotating the more serious, not your syllabus isn't serious, but more, you know, difficult academic texts, then they're primed for at least the toolage of it all. I have to look back, Kelly, at my step-by-step guide. It's been a while since I created that. How to turn over the teacher role. My understanding is you can do it assignment by assignment. This graphic is suggesting to me that I made the student, well, yeah, I make a student the teacher temporarily for a single activity. We don't yet have notifications right now, Jennifer. One way to see the most recent activity on a text is to use the annotation sidebar and sort by recency rather than location in the text, and that'll surface the most recent annotations. If you're on a text as well, and you see a little red arrow at the top of the sidebar, that's an indication that somebody, while you're looking at it, has added a new annotation, and it will refresh the sidebar. Awesome, Lynn.
Cool.
So they can't annotate offline, Jennifer. Great questions, by the way. I guess you guys are an hour into the day. It's a little heavy for me in my earlier hour here, and I'm sure even more so for my colleague in Mountain Time. But great questions. They can't. You can download the article, right? But you can't download the annotations on top of them. I personally think that the sort of dimensionality of an annotated text online just doesn't conform to the page. I don't know if you've tried to print a Google Doc before, but sometimes that becomes very inelegant, right? You end up having your page-long Google Doc and then like 5 pages of comments that kind of just trail off on weirdly formatted other pages. We are going to develop a way for a student to individually sort of carry their annotations with them. That's not possible right now, although we have a kind of backdoor way that we can offer to teachers and to students to get their annotations out. But eventually that'll be productized where I can just sort of grab my annotations and go.
But just to clarify, if you upload the document through Hypothesis into Moodle, can they download the document that way, or do we need to have it somewhere else for them? I'm thinking of students that may have limited or poor internet access as we're online.
Yeah, so, oh, it's not in here, but you can see in the, you can see in the demo, like the PDF at least is still in a frame that allows me to just do what I would normally do with a PDF, like download it. I don't remember where it is. Yeah, here, right? I can download it over here. So it's just a normal page. And you
Oh,
could print,
okay. It's behind
print,
the annotate pane. Sorry, I was looking for it, didn't see it.
yeah, and I could print this page too. Cool, Emily. I've worked very closely with Metro State Denver. They were one of our first production schools. Some really cool folks there. What discipline is your cousin in?
She's in social work.
Oh, okay,
which
cool.
is what I'm in too. So that's kind of funny.
Yeah.
But a year ago, she was like, "Oh, I want to show you this cool
Is it Ann
program that I
Oberman?
use with my students." What?
Ann Oberman?
Yeah, that's my
Oh,
cousin.
cool. Ann's awesome. Yeah.
That's so
Yeah,
funny.
she's-
Yeah, just a year ago, she was like, "I love Hypothesis."
Yeah, she's got some great. You should connect with her because she spread it throughout the Department of Social Work there, and
I
Guess I'm-
literally just texted and I was like, "Ann, guess what? I'm
Yeah,
in
cool.
a lecture about Hypothesis."
yeah, that's awesome. Ann is great. Yeah, I've met her in person too because she presented with me at a conference once.
Oh, cool.
So ASU Learn. I'm not familiar with. That was you, Emily, that asked about ASU Learn. Can you tell me what?
That's
what
our
that is?
Moodle.
That's,
Oh.
we just branded Moodle as you learn, ASU Learn.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I
Right,
was
so-
thinking like Arizona State or something like that. Okay, yeah. So no, yeah, I was wondering like why would this school be using it? But of course, there's more than one ASU. Yeah, so it's there. Right, Tom? It's available, or will be. Well,
Yeah,
we got to troubleshoot something, but
Well, some people are saying it's working, so it may have just been a burp this morning, but I can share my screen real quick if you want me
Okay.
to, and show them how to get to it.
I'm just gonna step away to see what my dog is eating for just 1 second.
Can you stop your screen share first?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll do my screen share real quick, and I'll hope it works. Like I said, it burped this morning, and I was like, oh no, it's not working. It was working the other day. So anyway, I mean, as you learn, this is just a dummy course. Just make sure you turn editing on first. I've already turned it on. So turn editing on. And
Oh, wait a minute. Are you a cat person?
No, actually, Greg had put that in for me as a dummy course. I guess he uploaded this. So I am actually not a cat person. I am a dog person. But, sorry, I got too many windows open here. Scroll down. Okay. All right, so I can just click on add an activity or resource, choose external tool, and just double click on that. And then give it an activity name, hypothesis test. And click on pre-configured tool. Here's all our external tool providers. You'll see hypothesis here at the bottom. It's not in alphabetical order, just the last ones that we put in place. So choose hypothesis. Again, you can turn grading on or turn it off. I'll just say off for that. And save and display. Let's see, open new window.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so here's where it was sticking for me early this morning. So when I click on enter URL, let's just do it. Submit. Looks like it's going to work. Yeah, okay, we're good. So that's pretty much it. And then you're back to where Jeremy was showing you about all the annotation options.
So Tom, if we want to allow students to upload their own, document to annotate, at what point would we do that?
I can feel that.
Yeah, go for it.
You'd create an activity like you normally would as everything you do, everything that that Tom just did, but instead of selecting the text yourself, I guess I can go in. I'm not, if I share again, can I do that again?
Yeah.
You're kind of pressuring me on the fly here, but let's just go in and look really quickly about adding a new external tool like Tom just did. I'm going to be the one that chooses hypothesis as the instructor. Here.
You're not sharing your screen yet.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry to put you on the spot. My students just all read different articles, so
no, it's I mean, it's an awesome thing for I just can't remember if I'm going to be able to remember all the steps of the process. Like I said, there's a guide, but so I add external tool, and we do, every Moodle instances can be a little different, so we do want to make sure that this is available. But so student article choice, so let me see if I remember where to do this.
I think it's actually under settings after you make the activity.
After you make the activity?
Yeah, so if Tom will pull up his screen, I think I found it.
Because I don't want to, this is the stage I want to leave available to the student. So I don't want to do that. I'm going to go back and edit it. Locally assign roles, does that sound right? This won't be also very helpful because there's nobody in this course, so I won't be able to move people around really.
Jeremy, is it possible for you to use a link to a Google document that maybe the students could give ahead of time, and then the instructors could create from the URL?
No, the way that Google presents the document would disrupt things. Yeah.
Okay, that's too bad. That'd be easy.
Permissions. Again, we have this document, I just don't always remember. That looks kind of scary.
After you create it, under edit, there's an assign roles option.
Okay. Edit settings.
It's not even there. It's back on the main landing page for the Moodle.
Okay.
So if you click on the little drop down arrow by edit.
Thank you. So when I assign roles, teacher. So this allows me to say who the teacher is for this particular assignment. So I do have to go through this workflow for every student, right? I have to go and say, Lev, make him the teacher for this. And then that would allow him to go in there and choose the article like a teacher normally would. But you do have to do this, activity by activity to set up those essentially shells for your students to add their text.
Okay, but like if I set up an activity for them to annotate their scholarly article, I could just move my entire class into the teacher role for this one activity. And then they could upload whatever article they choose, right?
Well, what I would do, I mean, it depends. You want each student to choose their own article, right?
Yes.
And then you want everybody to annotate with them?
No.
Or just have them
Normally,
annotate?
right.
Yeah, so I think you'd have to create n number of activities and then move each student, just as I did, one by one over to the teacher role for each of those. So you'd name them, you know, Susie, Johnson, Joe, Mearsman, Fred, Stevenson. Sorry, it's hard to come up with all the names.
Okay.
And you'd have to move them
Can
over
I-
one by one.
What if,
Actually,
who
I was
is that asking the question? What if you just asked your student to, each of your students to just put the hypothesis extension in Google, and then maybe could we view their annotations? Or you could just have them annotate a PDF just normally. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
that
yeah.
sounds like a lot of extra work is all I'm saying.
I mean, that's what I normally do. I normally just have them find their article. They go old school and they print it out. They do their handwritten annotations. They go to the library, scan it in, and they upload it to As You Learn as a document. And so I go through and, you know, I create an activity and look at their annotations and grade it or whatever. But I was just thinking if they can upload their individual article here and annotate it electronically, then I can view it that way. But
Yeah.
I mean, I can play around with it.
I think that'll work for this. I mean, the only caveat is that you'll have to do that. You have to create a shell for each student to do that. So instead of them going to the library and scanning, there's a little bit of work on you to create the space, but then they will have the opportunity to add their article, and it will be, and then I'll share the assignment step by step, but I think you can do what you want to do this way if you're willing to do what I just showed you, and maybe a couple other steps for each student. There's some other ways to do this, especially for peer review. I've seen professors say, everybody send me your paper. They make a giant PDF of all the students' papers. Again, this is dependent on class size perhaps, but make a giant PDF of all the papers the students submitted and then do peer review in one giant document. So there's lots of ways to be creative here. I think we're up on the hour, and I just want to say, this is not the end of the conversation. Erin and I are here as part of the pilot throughout the summer and fall, so feel free to reach out to us. You're in good company with a lot of other schools using Hypothesis. We have technical support at Hypothesis is who you can write if you have a technical issue. There's also a knowledge base if you want to self-serve. But these are links to create direct meetings with Erin and I moving forward. So we can walk you through these steps. We can also just chat about the pedagogy of the sort of any aspect of how you might want to use Hypothesis. So this is not the end of the conversation, and look forward to collaborating further offline.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I appreciate you leading this today, but also really appreciate the pilot of Hypothesis was given to us free for from now through the fall. So kudos to Hypothesis for allowing us to kick the tires on this and see what the campus interest is. And
I'm excited.
if you haven't done so, put your full name in the chat window, so then Jeremy could send me or I can actually download the file as a chat file. So we'll try to kind of loop back together with Jeremy and his folks and Aaron, and just we'll keep having some conversation around this. I think there's several people that emailed me today too that said they can't be here today, so I think there is some strong interest on our campus.
Great. I'll share the recording with you and some other resources to pass on to the group. But with the full names there, we can do a follow-up as needed. I mean, obviously we have the one-to-one resource, but also I'm happy to meet in the middle of the summer, at the end of the summer, check in about things as a group. I really do think the more you guys share with each other across disciplines about what's challenging and what's exciting, you'll give each other ideas about pedagogical implementation that will be really exciting, and that'll help create a great experience for everyone.
Is there a direct support contact if people are having any troubles and that I can't help figure out?
Support at Hypothesis.
Brand new for us.
Okay. Support at Hypothesis, and App State's prioritized there as a pilot school. So you'll get an immediate response from our support engineers. And then you have, my direct contact and Erin's direct contact for those pedagogical questions, or just, chats about how awesome it is and you just want to talk to somebody about it. We always love having those conversations.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
You too.